Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, Scripter Joe over here, and welcome back to another episode of this tutorial series making you a new Roblox scripter fledgling. Last episode we talked about two data types used to change the color properties of parts, which are color 3 and brick color. In this episode we are going to talk about the orientation property of parts and how the orientation property and position properties make up the C-frame of a part. We'll also introduce a math function that is useful to switch between degrees and radians, so follow along if you are interested in any of the terms I mentioned. I have already created a part in the workspace and have it selected since we want to talk about one of its properties. That property is the orientation property. The orientation property is the same as the position property in the sense that both are a part of the CFrame property, and it has its value set as a vector 3 data type. Three numbers make up this vector 3 property, and they represent the rotation of the part along the x, y, and z axes respectively. Now, before we talk more about the orientation property, I want to tell you about some useful tools on Roblox Studio that allow you to change the position, rotation, and size of a part model you create in the workspace without manually typing in the changes in the prompts of the property interface. These tools can be found in the Home tab and are the Move, Scale, and Rotate tools. You can select them by clicking on them or pressing their corresponding shortcuts, which are Ctrl 2 for Move, Ctrl 3 for Scale, and Ctrl 4 for Rotate. Let's select the Rotate tool and select the part to help you visualize the axes around which the part can be rotated. The tool highlights each rotation circle, which you can click on and drag with a specific color. The default colors used to represent the X, Y, and Z axes are red, green, and blue, respectively. Let's rotate the part we have selected along the x-axis represented by the red circle by clicking on it and dragging around the circle. If we look at the x value of the orientation property, which is the first number of the vector 3 value, while we rotate the part, we can see how the number changes. You could try rotating the part using the other axes to help you visualize how it changes the orientation property. Now let's delete this part and talk about how we can change the orientation of a part we create in a script. Let's say you create an anchored part with its position set to 0, 3, 0 in the workspace, and we want to change its orientation along the x-axis by 45 degrees. We can reference one of two properties in this case. We can reference the rotation property or the orientation property. Both can be used to change the orientation or to rotate the part. Let's stick with the orientation property. To change it, we assign it using the equal sign, and since the orientation property value is of the vector 3 data type, we use the vector3.new function to return a vector 3 data type. In the input, we type in the corresponding angles we want for the x, y, and z axes respectively. So let's change the x-axis to 45 and keep the y and z axes as their default values, which are 0. If we run the game, we will notice how, let's run the game and select the part, focus on it, and realize or notice how the orientation of the part changed. If you look at the orientation property, you can also see that the x-axis was rotated, or the part was rotated along the x-axis by 45 degrees. Something I need to point out though is that although both the rotation and orientation properties help rotate a part, they may result in something different when changing to the same value. I'll explain why in a different video external to this series, and I will explain when it is useful to use which. Now let's talk about another complex property of parts, and that is the CFrame property. So let's create a part, and if we scroll down in the properties interface, we will see something called CFrame. The CFrame property has two properties under it, or a part of it, which are the position and orientation. Both of these components make up the CFrame of this part. This means that we can change both the orientation and position properties by just changing the CFrame property. To change the C-frame of a part, you reference the property using part.CFrame, and then you set it to a new complex data type, which is the CFrame data type. To return a CFrame data type, you use the CFrame.new function. Now this function is special since it can accept different variations of inputs and return a different C-frame each time according to the inputs. We will only introduce one variation in this episode, but if you want, you can check out the other variations of inputs you can input into the function through its API on the Roblox provided API website. The variation we will talk about is typing in 3 numbers as input. This variation of input provides the position of the new C-frame. As we said previously, both orientation and position are a part of the CFrame property. By just typing in 3 numbers, we are telling the computer to change the position of the part to a vector 3 with these number coordinates. If we delete the line of code assigning the position property of the newly created part and input the 3 numbers of that position in the CFrame.new function and run the game, we can see how the part is still in its retained position. As you can see, the position property is set to 0, 3, 0. Now, if you want to change the orientation of a part through the CFrame property, we use a new function called CFrame.Angles. This function accepts 3 numbers of input which change the part orientation according to those numbers. The difference, however, is that you have to input the numbers in the radians unit form. To do this, we use a library of functions called math, and from that library we use a specific math.rad function. The math library has a bunch of other functions you will find useful if you're doing something advanced using physics and math related systems. The math.rad function specifically changes the angle number unit you input as degrees into a radians unit form. So if we use the command bar down here and type in print math.rad 90 as input, we can see that it prints out in the output interface the radians form of the degrees units you put inside. You can learn more about the differences between radians and degrees in the resource linked in the description. Now, if we want the orientation of the property to be changed to 45 degrees rotated along the x-axis and 0 degrees along the y and z axes, we have to input the 45 degrees in the radians form using math.rad, and then just zeros for the rest separated by commas. If we start the game, we can see, if we focus on the part, that the rotation of the part or orientation of the part is changed to 45, 0, 0 degrees along the x, y, and z axes respectively. But we can also notice that the position reverted back to the default position of a newly created part of 0, 0, 0. To change both the orientation and position properties of a part at the same time on the same line of code, using the CFrame property, we have to combine the 2 C-frames made from CFrame.new and CFrame.Angles. To combine C-frames in Roblox Lua, we multiply them using the asterisk symbol. So if we type in CFrame.new 0, 3, 0 multiplied by CFrame.Angles math.rad 45, 0, 0, this returns a combined C-frame with the position of 0, 3, 0 and the orientation of 45 degrees rotated along the x-axis and 0 degrees rotated along both the y and z axes. Now if we run this game and focus on the newly created part, we can see how the part is both positioned at the 0, 3, 0 position and rotated to a 45 degrees rotation or orientation along the x-axis and 0 degrees along both the y and z axes. In the next episode, we will introduce services and their usefulness, so stay tuned. I hope you enjoyed this learning experience, and if you want to continue, be sure to watch the next video. If you want to stop here, just save your progress by pressing File, Save to File. Be sure to support the channel by giving it a thumbs up and subscribing. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions or inquiries, feel free to ask in the comments section.